Much. Okay, so thank you everyone again for being here. My name is Brittany Kilbig. I have had the pleasure with corresponding with many of you here today because I do assist the court in recruiting for the grand jury and also the civil grand jury in completing their duties. So during today's presentation, we will be focusing on the civil grand jury here in Santa Clara County. And so while often confused with Superior Court trials, the civil grand jury has a lot of nuance to it. And so we are going to focus on the history of the civil grand jury a bit, and then also the responsibilities, jurisdiction, and qualifications to serve on the civil grand jury. Go over a bit of what that actually looks like in carrying out your service. And then the main event will actually be our panel discussion. So as I mentioned, we have 5 grand jurors with us today. They have generously agreed to share their perspective and answer questions that you all may have. And so with that in mind, I have a few Zoom norms that we'd like to agree on before we get started. We do ask that you mute yourself when you're not talking, but you absolutely, when we get to the panel discussion, if you have a question that you'd like to pose to the jurors, we absolutely encourage you to unmute, or you can also drop it in the chat box. If you are comfortable, please do go ahead and keep your camera on. Again, we are recording, so we understand if that's not something that you're able to do today. But then, as always, we just ask that you participate in a respectful way that promotes the greater good of all of us here today. And so, what is the civil grand jury? On this slide, you can see a brief history of what the prevailing view on the origins of the grand jury system is. And this history demonstrates that the service provided by Santa Clara County residents today has evolved from various basic principles, which legal scholars and historians continue to argue about kind of the origin behind, but they at least all agree that it dates back over centuries. So the genesis of the grand jury's watchdog function is thought to have been developed during the Grand Inquest in early England, where the point was to present accusations of neglect of duty for those who were responsible to keep and repair bridges and to inquire into the nature and repair of detention facilities. Civil grand juries today are actually still investigating infrastructure concerns and inquiring into the upkeep of jails. And so you can see here some of those major dates, but we do know that grand juries have had the concept of secrecy or confidentiality at least by the 17th century. And so that concept of confidentiality still remains central to grand jury service today. The model of an independent local or county grand jury also still stays with us today. And the concept of grand juries that was included in our original state constitution. So we have Article 1, Section 23 highlighted here, which requires that a grand jury be drawn and summoned at least once a year in each county. So as constituted today, this does fall to the judicial branch, like I mentioned, and in our county, that's the Superior Court here. The constitutional mandate for the court to recruit and for grand juries to carry out these duties is actually supported by statutory provisions in the California codes. We've listed those here in this slide, but you can see that there's penal code, that the penal code really focuses on selection and impanelment, whereas the government code also includes the accusation process. We'll talk a little bit more about those responsibilities later, but there is some clarification on these code sections and on the supporting statutes in opinions written by the Supreme Court and the Courts of Appeal. And so the case law that supports the powers and duties of the grand jury is quite complex. Because of that, the legislature has provided for legal assistance for each county grand jury. So today in Santa Clara County, County Counsel's Office does serve as a primary legal advisor to the grand jury. And then there's also support and training from the Office of the District Attorney for accusation and other more quasi-criminal functions. So what does that look like today? What else has developed? So the number of civil grand jurors on the panel is actually determined by the population size of the county. So in Santa Clara County, we have 19 citizens who compose this independent body. As you can see here, we've highlighted that all voting is equal. And so no juror can be dismissed in their opinion. Or taken for granted. It's very much a democratic process. The civil grand jury does only function lawfully as a body, and so much of the work is done in committees, but a majority of the panel must actually agree on all public actions, final findings, recommendations, and reports. So essentially, the civil watchdog agency ensures accountability and serves as a fact-finding body for public complaints. So grand jurors are impaneled for a one-year term, but they can apply to serve and be appointed to a second consecutive term as a holdover. And so just looking at the civil grand jury system, one thing to kind of highlight is that it is very separate and distinct from the criminal grand jury in our county and from trial juries. So trial juries, when you're summoned for jury duty, you are summoned by the court to come in and serve on a 12-member body, and there's one trial. A criminal grand jury is also randomly summoned, but they only serve for the duration of the time to hear criminal cases that are presented by the district attorney. So our California civil grand juries, and here in Santa Clara County, really focuses on these three responsibilities. So these three primary functions are the major functions of present-day grand jurors in the civil capacity, and considerable effort is devoted to these responsibilities. So in the watchdog function, the grand jury may examine all aspects of county and city government, special districts, any offices, even if nonprofit, that are primarily funded by tax dollars. And the reason for this examination is to ensure the best interest of Santa Clara County residents is being served. So the grand jury through this does review and evaluate procedures, methods, and systems utilized by government offices to determine whether more efficient or economical programs can be employed. The grand jury is also authorized to inspect and audit books, records, and financial expenditures, again, with the goal of ensuring that public funds are being properly accounted for and legally spent. And then, as I mentioned, one of the tenets that has remained throughout history is that the grand jury is charged with inquiring into the condition of county jails and detention centers. So the accusation function, while rarely used, is another responsibility of the grand jury. So grand jurors are authorized to inquire into charges of willful misconduct in office by public officials and to determine whether to present formal accusations requesting their removal from office. And so most of the grand jury findings, like I said, they're primarily through this watchdog role, are outlined in final reports. And so the findings and corresponding recommendations for solutions are contained in these final reports. The final reports are posted on the Superior Court's public website. I have that hyperlink here. And we actually have an archive back to 2001. So that's over 20 years of grand jury reports. And the grand jury does issue final reports at any point in their term. So it's not as specific to a certain month or release date, but rather as the grand jury completes their investigations and they feel it's ready to go to the public for consideration, and then also to have the affected agency respond to these reports. So going back to the code sections, there is a code section requirement that all affected agencies respond to the grand jury's reports, and they actually have to outline whether they agree, disagree, and some very specific parameters that ensure that the offices are reviewing the grand jury's recommended solutions and that they are responding, and we also make those responses available to the public online. So it's on that website. This is just a little bit about investigating resident complaints. I think we've gone over the most of the responsibilities, but this form here, the complaint form, is available to all members of the public, and the civil grand jury does receive, analyze, and then determine whether or not to start an investigation. Focusing really on who the grand jury can investigate. The column on the left does cover the main areas of focus for the grand jury. It's important to note the grand jury does not have jurisdiction over the courts, over state or federal government, or most private citizens. You'll notice this asterisk here going back to the legislature's recognition of the complex nature of these tasks and therefore calling for legal advisors. A functional analysis may be needed and supported by county council to determine if a private person or corporation is actually funded to or does actually perform government functions. So if, for example, a nonprofit is 100% funded by the county, it may be subject to oversight of the grand jury. So with that in mind, just a quick look at who serves on the civil grand jury. Listed here are the penal code requirements, as well as the requirement to file a Form 700 statement of economic interests. There are only 4 disqualifiers for serving on the grand jury, including not currently serving as an elected official. Does not bar you from serving if you previously served as an elected official. Just 2 things can't be true at once. And so beyond this, the court does really seek qualified applicants from all backgrounds, regardless of education, career. We really strive to have a panel that reflects the broad diversity of Santa Clara County, which is the goal of the grand jury is to serve the community and to reflect back that beautiful diversity. So the grand jury will serve on a fiscal year term moving forward. There were some changes, but we're going back. The next panel will be chosen in June and start in July to serve for 1 year. You can see here a general outline of how this would be typically broken down, with, of course, maintaining confidentiality at all times. Really looking at some of those recent changes, the term of the grand jury had changed due to the COVID-19 pandemic, but again, like I said, the court and the Board of Supervisors have facilitated the transition back to the fiscal year term. We do fully support leveraging technology, and the court does provide the Microsoft suite of products to the grand jurors so that they can use things like Teams, all of the Word, Excel, PowerPoint, etc. And then also using Teams to engage in remote work if and when possible. And then we have recently, we're very pleased to share that there have been per diem and mileage rate increases. So every sitting civil grand juror is eligible to claim up to $45 a day, or I'm sorry, I should say claim $45 in per diem for official grand jury business, and then mileage reimbursement at the IRS rate for any miles driven in support of that grand jury work. So we are going to get to the panel. I feel like I should stop talking very soon, but I wanted to just highlight that Judge McGowan, presiding Judge McGowan, is overseeing the recruitment of the 2024-2025 civil grand jury. Applications are due at the end of this month. And so we will email out today's slides and a link to the application, but just really wanted to highlight that that's coming up rather soon in terms of getting your application in. We'll only be able to accept them through March the 29th. And so with that in mind, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to pin our amazing panelists today. So today we are joined by Joanne Polverino, by Jill Lutz, by Scott Duncan, by Cecilia Deck, and I'm trying to scroll through all the floating little boxes here. Did I lose Pamela?
No, Pam's here.
Thank you, Pamela. Okay, there she is. And Pamela Elliott. So I should have pinned it. You should be able to see all of our 5 wonderful panelists today. But again, we have some questions that we're going to go through with the panel, and we encourage you again, members of the audience, to also, have your questions that you want to pose as well, or you can utilize the chat box. But first, Joe, I'm wondering if you can tell us a bit about your background and how it prepared you to serve on the civil grand jury.
Sorry, took a while to unmute. So my background, I was a teacher and I taught 5th grade for 30 years. And I was also serving as a city council member in the city of Salinas for 18 years. And I served as a school board trustee for 4 years down in Salinas. And I just kind of stumbled upon this opportunity and decided to apply, and found that just a lot of my previous experience fit well with the jury and the work that we were being asked to do. And that's kind of how I stumbled on this.
Wonderful, thank you. Joanne, did you have a similar background to Jill, or can you tell us a little bit about what led you to serving on the grand jury?
Yes, certainly. I spent all of my time in the financial services industry, and majority of it in human resources. And when I retired, it's like I needed to do some other type of service work. And so this came about, and I applied like Jill did. And I think a lot of what I did as far as investigations, listening to people, research, interviewing, writing, that all helped in working with the grand jury. I think you'll find you have a lot of transferable skills you may not realize really work and well with the grand jury.
Thank you, Joanne. Cecilia, can you talk to us about some of those transferable skills from your background, or what you did to prepare to serve on the grand jury?
So my background was I was a newspaper reporter, a journalist. And after that, I was a journalism teacher and English teacher at community college. And so I had writing skills and some technical skills, although maybe not the right ones. But so those skills transfer, because we do a lot of writing, especially toward the end. We're putting out reports that will be published. So they need, they're needing editing and writing skills. I may be answering the next question, but the beauty of the civil grand jury with 19 of us, people come from all different worlds. And so we had people with accounting experience, of which I have none, right? I know nothing about accounting, but people bring many skills from many different areas, human resources, and then actually having served in local governments. So, yeah. Thanks.
Wonderful, thank you. And I think you teed us up rather nicely for Scott to talk a little bit about what experience or education is actually helpful for serving on the grand jury.
Oh, thank you. And welcome everyone here. It just seems it was only a year and a half ago that I was sitting in your chair wondering what this thing is all about and whether I should submit my name here. The short answer on what experience is needed is it's your experience that's needed. Like what Cecilia said, we really benefit from having a variety of experiences and knowledge among the 19 grand jury members. Personally, I came from a high-tech background. Maybe that helped me and the rest of the grand jury in a few ways. One, I was pretty comfortable working in a Zoom environment, just, working constantly in a Zoom environment with different people to get things done. And two, I have a little bit of project management experience, and maybe that helped me to organize some of our investigative work. And I was also familiar with some of the Microsoft Office tools, but Brittany will be there to help you if you're not already familiar with the Microsoft Office tools. So in summary, really no special experience or education is needed. What we really need is you and your individual experience.
Thank you, Scott. And I didn't even pay him to say I would be there to help. He just volunteered that. Pamela, is there anything that you'd like to share about what experience or education you found has been helpful for you while serving on the grand jury?
I can only repeat that, I mean, I feel my background and experience helped me, but it wasn't the motivating force for me to apply. I saw the ad come over next door and I thought, well, that should be interesting. I was retired. I had some time, but it also helped me to look at some of the reports that had been done by previous grand juries, and you could really find something in there that you're passionate about. And if something should come through the grand jury that you can help, watching out for what, you could right or wrong and make an improvement. I mean, that's the motivating force, I think. You're giving back. So that's my motivating force, but you do not need million of degrees or anything. Common everyday experience for the local resident, I think, is really important.
Wonderful, thank you. Before we kind of leave this background experience and what led you here, did any of our panelists want to add anything? Okay, well then, Joe, I'm wondering if you might be able to talk to us a little bit about if you've been able to take time off for vacations or holidays, any time off for personal commitments as a grand juror?
So it's kind of funny, when I first signed up for this, I thought 2023 was going to be a year that we weren't going to be doing a lot of traveling, and we didn't. And so I thought, well, this is great. I'll be pretty free to do this. And as life happens, there were at least 2 times, including this morning, when in the middle of meetings, I was pulled away for family emergencies. And it's interesting because the first time I was pulled away in the middle of a meeting, my granddaughter had broken her knee and I had to rush her to the hospital. But I said to Scott, I'm so sorry I have to leave. And he said, family first. And that's kind of been the way that it's been, at least for me this year, is, it's either vacations or time out, or it's family that you don't quite anticipate a crisis or an emergency. And the court it's very flexible. As Scott said, and I'm sorry, Scott, I keep referring to you, but it just happened that it was your meeting that my granddaughter broke her knee, that there's other people on the investigative committee. You're not alone. You're not doing this by yourself. And so when you have to race off, there's at least 6 more people that jump right in and carry right through as if you were there, and they catch you up on what went on. And it's remarkably flexible in terms of allowing people to take breaks, to take vacations, to get away, and to deal with those family emergencies.
Well, not that we love emergencies, but I am glad to hear that's been your experience, Joe.
Yeah.
Pamela, can you talk to us about your experience with scheduling time off, vacations, and any other of those logistical pieces?
Well, I can say I've not had any problem taking any time off. And as Jill has said it, very well. There's a good group of support. The other really nice thing about the jury, and I'm not sure I could do this if, number one, it wasn't flexible and it wasn't remote. You can have a meeting on the fly. In other words, if you have a meeting with 5 people and 3 of them have a conflict, okay, can we find another time to do this? So it's not, we do get together now that, COVID's sort of lightened up a little bit, every 6 weeks or so in the suite. And that's nice, to regroup and meet in person. But the advantage of having this as a remote working relationship is really, really probably one of the best attributes in terms of getting things done and communicating.
Thanks, Pamela, and I hope it's okay that I pick on you, because I just saw a question come through from Mr. Petrick, and he's asking if you meet on a daily basis.
Well, it depends what you're involved with on the grand jury. We have our regular weekly meetings where all 19 of us get together. That's called a plenary meeting. And it depends on what committees you might be involved in. Most committees are standing committees, you know, they meet maybe once a week. And then if you're involved in an investigation, your investigation has a chairman and or chairperson, and that committee will meet at a time that's mutually agreeable. And wherever the investigation leads will determine how many meetings you have. So you could meet every day, or you could meet, you know, 3 days a week. It really varies. So that's, again, is the beauty of the remote setting, you know.
Thank you, Pamela. And just because you did mention this, I'll put the plug in there that the court does strongly, highly, very much encourage that all grand jury work is performed within business hours. So there's some rare exception that maybe a school board meeting or a town hall is scheduled in the evening, and perhaps a committee decides they need to view that in order to complete a whole investigation. But we observe all holidays, you know, federal and state holidays, and those court business hours are set in stone. So just that small plug for the hours there. I do see that we're going to ask to Scott if you might be able to talk to us about, you know, kind of with that logistical piece in mind, but also what being available means as a grand juror.
I see we're getting some questions in on chat, so hopefully we'll get to those pretty soon. You know, being available, that's a tough one to answer. You know, Brittany just said we try to stay within court hours, weekdays, 9 to 5. But that doesn't mean, you know, like Pamela was saying, we're not always meeting 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. There's lots, I mean, you know, frankly, I had only one meeting this morning before this one. So some days you find you're pretty well booked up. And again, it's just all dependent upon what teams you're on and what you sign up for yourself and what the grand jury decides are going to be the meeting dates. It's possible you'll have a Monday 9 a.m. meeting or a Friday 4 p.m. meeting, but you know, those are pretty rare. But the answer is, you need to expect to be available most of the weekdays, most of the time. It doesn't mean there's going to be a meeting those times. And I forget whether it's been mentioned already, but it also kind of what is being available and how many hours to work really depends a lot on the time of the year. Frankly, a lot of us here are involved with writing reports, and that's when it gets more intense. Earlier in the year, you have a lot more flexibility. So it kind of depends on who you are, how much you want to commit. And I think everyone will find kind of what works for them.
Thank you, Scott. And I'm wondering, Cecilia, if you could please build on not only what being available means as a grand juror, but I'm also hoping to put you on the spot just to roll into questions I've seen come in the chat. If that's okay with you.
Sure.
We have, thank you. Ms. Kim asked if each meeting is usually a full day or if some are a shorter period of time. And actually, if you'd like to answer those two now, we can get to some of the others later, Cecilia. Thank you.
Okay, so Pamela mentioned that we have a plenary meeting once a week with all 19 members. Mostly, just to reiterate, those are online. Almost all our meetings are online and not in person. And the plenary meeting is scheduled for 3 hours, but it's usually an hour to an hour and a half to get the business done. Most meetings during the week are about an hour to an hour and a half per meeting. And so it would depend how many investigative committees you're on. So say we have 19 of us, we might have 5 to 10 investigative committees, and you choose which ones you want to be on, which investigations you want to get involved with. And so then you would attend the meetings of those. And we have a global, technology is fantastic. We have a global calendar, so people are trying not to schedule meetings at the same time as each other to conflict. And that usually works. And did I answer that?
Absolutely. Yes. No, that's
Okay.
great. Well, I'm wondering, Cecilia, do you have anything to add to the idea of being available? And then also, Mr. Fuller had asked in the chat if you can give, and so in the interest of full disclosure, these beautiful panelists cannot talk about specifics of their investigations, right? So they're not going to be able to give you, this is how often specifically or how many committees specifically. But Mr. Fuller does have a good question, Cecilia, that I think you might be able to speak to in general terms about, are you often at government sites doing these investigations and information gathering? Is most of the government business still being conducted on site or in person, or is there another route that you often see taken?
So there's a few answers to that. One is that part of our duty as civil grand jury is to oversee the jails. So at the beginning of our term, in the first quarter or so of our term, we toured the main jail and the one in Milpitas, Elmwood. So those were official grand jury tours. Some committees might be involved in something where it's a good idea to go out and look at something, or it's a good idea to go to government meetings, school board or city council meetings or something like that. Not every committee does that. And it seems to me that there's not an obligation to go anywhere. We do end up going to a few places, but I don't think any individual grand juror would be obligated to go to anywhere, because say you're on a committee and most of the committee goes to look at something, I don't think everybody has to go. That's my impression of that. And then just generally being available to me has meant I'm trying to be available Monday to Friday during business hours. I've traveled on week-long trips. I've traveled on long weekends. Everybody has appointments. So that it's easy in a way. If you hadn't, which I didn't work 9 to 5, I was a community college teacher, but if you had a 9 to 5 job, to me, it's easier to have appointments during grand jury work than it would be during a 9 to 5 job. But you can always look in advance. Oh, is my committee meeting? Or I'm not going to make any appointments during plenary because we're supposed to be there during plenary. So you're paying attention to your schedule quite a bit. Yeah.
Thank you, Cecilia. We did have a question before we pivot away from this conversation about if jurors are expected to not be working regular jobs. And I do think the court does ask for each applicant to commit to 20 to 25 hours per week on average. So that's excluding holidays, it's excluding vacations, and then again, with the requirement that there be certain duties performed during business hours. For example, the orientation and training and the charge delivered by presiding Judge McGowan, that will all be during court business hours. The suite, I think Pamela mentioned earlier, there's confidential workspace for the grand jury, only available during court business hours. So while we do have jurors who are able to do, maybe they're a business owner and the business hours that they have are different than the court, or if you're on contract work or part-time evening weekend work. But it really is an individual assessment of your ability to dedicate those hours. So moving over to I saw Ms. Barnes had a question on this, and Joanne, I wonder if you might be able to talk. Her question was, do grand jurors receive any specific training to serve? And so I'm wondering, Joanne, if you can talk about that question, but also about resources that are available to you as a grand juror.
Certainly, thank you, Brittany. And yes, and this, and we do get a lot of initial training, and part of that includes understanding your role. And we also have a handbook. We also hear from the presiding judge. We also have legal counsel that gives us, very good information and also understanding our role. One of the key parts of being a juror is confidentiality. You can never, that's one thing that's very different. I will point out with the grand jury that, you go, if you serve on a trial and then it's over, you can tell all your friends what went on. You cannot do this here. I mean, you never can mention it. And even if you serve again at another point in time, you cannot talk about that. But in addition to that, and we do, I mean, Brittany gives us what she calls our tech talks. And in the beginning, trust me, it's like, oh my gosh, I thought I knew what I was doing, but maybe not. So she's very good at addressing any of those issues. And the handbook, again, I mentioned, and also we have each other. I have to say that, our combined skills, and Scott referenced it, Pam referenced it, together, it's amazing how we help each other. And again, I'll just mention briefly that other grand jurors, if they decide to hold over and on the jury, they can answer general questions. They can help us navigate and not to break confidentiality. It is Microsoft Teams and Words, and it's okay if it doesn't work. We've had a few conflicts if you had Microsoft Teams and now you're on the course, but we figured it all out. So you're not alone. That's all I can tell you. Between the group and Brittany, we have it made.
You are so kind, Joanne. Thank you for that answer and for your perspective on resources and training available. Before we pivot, I want to give each panelist some time for general advice and thoughts about contemplating applying to serve. But we have a lot of questions in the chat about complaints and investigations. So I'm hopeful that I will be able to turn to our wonderful panelists to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to just read out a couple questions here that I'm seeing in the chat, and then if someone is so inclined to respond, please go ahead and do so. Otherwise, I'll call on someone. But so here's a couple of the questions here is, how many cases might the grand jury be working on at any time? And who refers those cases to be investigated? And then who decides which cases get to be addressed? So it's kind of a three-parter there, and I'm wondering if I might be able to pretty please ask one of our panelists to go ahead and address that.
I'll give it a try. At the slide presentation, Brittany brought up a complaint form, which is available online for anyone within Santa Clara County to complete. And that form goes directly to Brittany's office, and then it's filtered into the grand jury. We review that, and if it is deemed something we can look into, then we go to the next step. So as far as how many cases, that's really dependent on how many complaints we get. And I can't really say anything about what we've gotten this year, but it's just really dependent upon what we get from the public. Did I hit them all?
That is absolutely wonderful. And I do see, thank you, Pamela. Joanne has her hand up as well.
Yeah, and also another charge of the grand jury is the grand jury can do what's called an internal investigation. That's another part of it. They come in from the public, and if we see something, or the jury, at the time the panel jury sees something that they want to address, they can actually write up an internal complaint, and it goes through the same process. And it's very unanimous. I mean, this is done not just by one person saying, yes, we are a team, a group of 19, and that's who makes the decision.
Great points, Joanne. Thank you for mentioning the internal process, and also, again, that the grand jury functions as a body. And so those votes are critical to making really anything that the body decides on, it must be voted on. And so in terms of just generals too, in general numbers, on the public website going back to 2001, you can see past reports, and you can see that grand juries have issued 5 reports in a term. Some grand juries have issued 15 reports in a term. And so I'm sure that we all can imagine that there may be reasons for the different numbers. Maybe some reports are longer than others, maybe some are short and sweet, but that varying degrees of committee work would have to go into those various investigations. So was there anything else from any of our other panelists about investigating complaints from the public and how you choose those issues before we move on from that?
I see a question, who's responsible?
Yeah.
Who's in charge of writing and submitting reports? And so the way we divide up our work, we have investigative committees, and the investigative committees write the report. And then there's an editorial committee that people from the editorial committee are assigned to edit the report. And so we have a lot of, it kind of reminds me of my teaching days. I mean, there's a lot of rules of how to structure things. In fact, more rules even than writing essays in school. But that's how the writing gets done. So if your skill is not writing, you have many other skills, and somebody else is going to clean up what you did, probably.
And could I just add to that, is that it's really, I found kind of staggering, the oversight that when the investigative committee puts together the report, and it does go to editorial, as Cecilia was saying, and then it goes back to plenary to be cleaned up, and then and it just goes through a process of steps. And Brittany, I'm not sure, you probably know offhand, but there's probably about 6 steps before it even gets close to being released, but it still has to be approved by the plenary before it can be. So if we weren't in the committee that wrote the report, we're still responsible for the report. Every report that comes out is the responsibility of all of us.
Perfectly said, Jill. Thank you so much for pointing that out. And it is, as Jill has alluded to, some of those steps do include legal advice. So the Office of the County Counsel represents the civil grand jury. They do have ethical walls within their office. So both the court and county counsel's office, we bar all grand jury information and functionings from any other division, right? So there's methods in place for that, but then county counsel's office can provide advice to the civil grand jury on jurisdiction and approach and any of the legal issues that they might be running into. I did see, and I appreciate both Cecilia and Jill, you answering the questions that are coming in. And there is a question about if there is a foreperson or a court-appointed leader of the group, and how that really works. So I'm wondering if any of our panelists might be willing to talk a little bit about officers on the grand jury. Not to call anyone out, but we may have the secretary and secretary pro tem on today's call. And so if one of you would like to take that question, please feel free to.
Yeah, well, I can address that as far as we do have a 4-person. And then there is a 4-person pro tem. There is a secretary. There's a secretary pro tem. And again, these, other than I'm correct, Brittany, the 4-person is appointed by the presiding judge. But other than that, I mean, again, you can volunteer. And I think that's a big piece of it, of being willing to step up. You may have done some of that kind of work in a previous job you had, or a previous, group you belong to. And that's how it works. So it's very, very democratic. And again, so far, everybody supports everybody. And so I think it's important for the structure. If you think we don't really have what I'm going to call a boss. I mean, we have all worked and we have a boss. Even if we work for ourselves, we're our own boss. And again, I think it's the collectivity and the collaboration that really, makes for a really good grand jury.
Thank you, Joanne. Wonderful. So there was a question from Mr. Desai about findings and reports being made public and shared with the person who filed the complaint, or if it's a responsibility for the court. And then I also want to acknowledge Mr. Swanson had asked about reports being due in the spring. So as all of our sitting panelists know, the civil grand jury is required to release at least one report in its term. That is a mandate that they are required to release at least one report. Can I ask, let's see, Cecilia, do you have a due date for those reports? Is spring when they have to come out?
They have to come out by spring. Yes. Yeah, so we could, I mean, this is hindsight, we could have released reports earlier had they been ready, but we're starting to face deadlines because once the civil grand jury is finished with the report, it has to go to the lawyer to make sure that it follows proper legal procedures. It has to go to Brittany to make sure it reads properly, and it has to go to the presiding judge. So everything is kind of being backdated from that. So we're kind of in a crunch right now where things have to get done. And then someone else asked who releases it. Actually, I believe it's you, Brittany, who will physically release the reports. There is a website you can look at last year's, and you can look back 24 years worth of 23 years worth of reports online. And the media will get the report when it is released, and the media will the newspapers and TV and such, depending how interested they are, will do report, news reports about it, about the reports. And one thing no one has really mentioned, but well, Joanne kind of mentioned, is we cannot, while we're on the grand jury, we can't talk to our spouses, we can't talk to our family, our friends, anybody about our cases. We really become close with each other because we're the only people we can talk to about this stuff. And as Joanne mentioned, for the rest of our lives. So it's not just while I'm on during my term, which is going to expire in June, I can never talk about it. So the report is the voice of the civil grand jury. It's what we came up with, and that's the last say on that item, unless the next civil grand jury looks at that situation again. So there's a lot of confidentiality, and we swear to that, and I guess it could be contempt of court if we spoke out of turn. So yeah.
And also, we're a little unique. We are what's called the back end of a transition jury during COVID. The actual timing of the grand jury went to annual versus fiscal. So thankfully, all of us agreed we're an 18-month jury, which is more unusual. And that may also affect the timing of the reports too, because you have to get them out. Normally, they have to go out by the end of the year. And ours is a little different too, because of just the timing of our jury. And as Cecilia did, that, they're released as they're ready. And so there's no specific date. It's just the review process, how complicated they are.
Thank you, Joanne and Cecilia. It is a very complex process. I think I mentioned earlier about penal code sections, and actually Cecilia hit on this release to the report. It's all guided by the penal code. And so, yes, I am the staff person supporting us meeting those penal code section requirements. And then the presiding judge, Judge McGowan, is involved with the release of the reports in terms of just authorizing or ensuring, I should say, that the civil grand jury has met their duties. Because at the beginning of each term, the presiding judge will actually charge the grand jury and deliver the charge of what they are required to do. And she really has guided that process in that sense. So we have about 10 minutes left. I did see that there's maybe a question in here about holdovers. We can't speak to that process because frankly, it's not done yet. The penal code also guides the number of jurors, right? And so the court is actually only authorized to put 30 names into a hopper. And so presiding Judge McGowan will oversee that process, which may include background checks, consideration of holdovers, but it will also mean including alternates. And so at the ceremony in June, the alternates will also be selected, as well as the incoming panel. So I think I should say, caught all the questions in the chat, but I wanted to invite, if there's any other questions, if anyone would like to unmute or drop anything else in the chat, we absolutely want to make time for that as well. Okay, well, hearing none and seeing no hands, I'm wondering if each of our panelists might be willing to just take a moment and share with us something that you would tell a friend, a coworker, a colleague, someone you like, and just kidding, what you would tell someone if they were contemplating applying to serve on the 2024-2025 civil grand jury. And we'll start with Scott.
Yeah, as I started this out here, I remember what it's like sitting in your position here, hearing about penal codes and judges and those sorts of things, and really wondering if this was the right thing to do. My advice here is do it. You won't regret it. Um, I applied and I have not looked back. It's been just about one of the most interesting year plus experiences in my life. So just do it.
Thank you, Scott. And Jill, what say you?
That was hard to follow up. That was absolutely perfect. I think that I would say that, it was really a monumental experience. I'm so glad I did it. There were times that I felt a little burnt out because there was a lot of work, but boy, just looking back at the last year and a quarter that we've been working, it's really been exceptional. And I'm so glad that I had this experience, and it's busy now as we're wrapping up all these reports, and it's exciting, but it really is phenomenal. I wouldn't have missed this for the world.
Thank you, Jill. Joanne.
Yeah, I just to support everything that Jill and Scott have said, and it really, you can make a difference. You really can make a difference. And also, I think that another thing is that you want to be able to speak up. I mean, if you don't feel comfortable expressing your ideas, please, every idea is valuable. Be open-minded, be curious. Everyone contributes. You will learn a lot. You will never read the paper the same way. The core does support balance. And lastly, if you're not sure, read some of the reports, even if it's not last year's, but just go through the ones that are there, and you can see the difference that things have made. And maybe you will say, oh, I read about this, oh, and it was in a grand jury report. So I think if you're not sure, just look at those. And again, I found that, being open-minded and curious, I've learned things I never knew before, and it's really made a difference. And I'm so, so glad that I did this.
Thank you, Joanne. We are glad you're here. And Cecilia, can I ask, do you have any advice or thoughts that you would share with someone contemplating applying to serve?
It's very rewarding and you learn a lot. Joanne mentioned curiosity, and that is why I became a newspaper reporter in the first place, is I'm very curious, and I've just learned so much about local government. So it's my own learning, but also the feeling that I can make a difference, the feeling that we can improve different aspects of local government through the work we're doing. And so it's very rewarding that way.
Thank you, Cecilia. And last but absolutely certainly not least, Pamela, what can you share with us about your thoughts?
It's completely worthwhile, fulfilling. You give back. It's a master class in civics. As Joanne said, you'll never look at the newspaper in a different light. You'll understand a lot more about how things run, whether it's in your city or somewhere else. Everybody who was on the panel brought something. Everyone brought something, whether it be technical, research. It was just very fulfilling in that way too. And I will have to say that I've met some people through this process that I probably will take with me, as I, journey through. So the application process, I always felt I got excellent feedback from Brittany. What is the next step? What should I do? I mean, so I never had any worries, and that told me things were pretty darn organized. So I would really encourage people to just, try it. It is, you do give back. It's a good thing.
Thank you so much, Pamela. And I know I said that I would, these were our closing thoughts, but Mr. McCann actually asked a very, very good question in the chat here. So I'm going to put Scott back on the spot here. And Scott, can I ask, if selected, can you tell your family, friends, or pets that you are serving on the grand jury? And can you tell them what issues you're working on? Scott, I think you are muted, my friend.
Sorry, yes, the answer is yes and no. It's actually public information. You could see who the grand jury members are on the website. So you could see our names there. So yes, you can tell anyone you know that you're on the grand jury, and you cannot tell them anything about what we are discussing, what cases you're on, what cases the grand jury is looking at. So it's public knowledge that you're on the grand jury, and as it's been said before, you can't talk about a whole lot else.
And Brittany, I did see a question that asked about where the past reports are. So if you go to the Santa Clara County Superior Court website, and then you'll see, I think it's on the right-hand side, it says grand jury. And Brittany, you might be able to navigate this better, but you can just go down and you can see that's where all of the reports are. And those are the published reports, so you can feel free to read them. They are actually there for everybody to read. And I'm not sure, I think I saw one come across about confidentiality, but Scott talked about that. I have to admit that pets at times are the only ones that are allowed to join, but they sign a confidentiality and non-disclosure agreement as well. Other than the pets who can't talk, your lips are sealed. And I know, I honestly, people have asked me, and it's interesting that most people respect that. I've never had a friend, and a lot of my friends know I'm doing this, and they never ask. They kind of know not to ask. So don't feel uncomfortable if you have to say, I really can't speak about it. I've never had anybody say, why not? Why can't you? They just understand the work that we do.
Thank you, Joanne. And again, I saw some nice messages in the chat about thanking you for your service. And so I know we have about 2 minutes left. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Just want to thank our panelists today, not only for sharing this with us, but for your service to our community in the role of a civil grand juror and going above and beyond by being here as part of our recruitment efforts. I also want to thank our audience for being here. These were great questions. And we do actually have a former grand juror in the audience. I see Karen Michael. If you'd like to say hello, she's certainly a powerhouse in many ways. And so we appreciate you all being here.
Sure, I'd love to say hi. I have been on the Santa Clara County Civil Grand Jury 3 times, so
Wow.
I don't think I need to say much more about how I feel about it. I am now a trainer, the 2-day training that you all will be given by the California, oh no, they've changed their name, the Civil Grand Jurors Association. So I'm hoping I will be assigned to the new grand jury to be one of your trainers. So, and I would have to say that Brittany and your panelists have done an incredible job explaining it. So good luck to everybody who's on it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you everyone for being here. Again, we are going to email out the slides for today's presentation, and the number that's on the application is my direct line. So just call if you have any thoughts, questions, if we didn't get to you today, to your question, I'm sorry, or if it's the middle of the night and you think, gosh, I didn't ask about X, Y, and Z. The court is extremely grateful to our public, the members of the public that engage in this process, and anything that we can do to make that easier, we are happy to do so. So again, thank you, Jill, Joanne, Scott, Pamela, Cecilia. Thank you everyone for being here, and I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.
Thanks, Brittany.
Thank you, Brittany. Thank you.